Certainly want to thank Bill and want to thank the Press Club. This is a prestigious organization, whether you believe it or not, well respected among public relations professionals, advertising professionals, and communications professionals all across the state. And so I appreciate the opportunity, the rare opportunity that you get to come and speak before a group like this. Let me explain. Unfortunately, Ann Schoenfeld, who was going to be here and was going to do most of the presentation, she took ill this morning and was unable to make it, and so she asked if I would mind stretching my presentation, and I certainly don't mind doing that. Be glad to answer any questions, but in all honesty, may not have all the answers regarding Ann's material, and we'll pass that on. Let me also give a thank you. Bill mentioned that Marisa and I work with the Hall of Fame committee from the Manship School of Mass Communication, and we are having an induction ceremony of 3 very worthy inductees later this year, and the Press Club is going to be one of the sponsors, and I want to thank you so much for doing that. We have annual inductions for some of the most talented communications professionals in the world, and I think it's great that this Press Club would contribute to that as well. Let me tell you, I'm going to wear a couple of hats today, so please don't bust me when I'm talking on behalf of the propane industry. I'm allowed to say stuff about the legislature and what snakes they are sometimes, and how we're disappointed in what the legislature did. And I'm not allowed to say that as chairman of the board of the Clean Fuels Coalition. So please don't get me in trouble when you're if you decide to quote any of these. Make sure that the quotes with the legislature are Randy Hayden represented the Louisiana propane industry when he was talking bad about what the legislature this year did. Louisiana Clean Fuels was established in 1997. This is our 20th anniversary. In 2000, the Department of Energy, State Department of Energy, recognized us as a Clean Cities program. You may recognize the term Greater Baton Rouge Clean Cities Coalition. We started out as that, and then we grew, and we now have 58 parishes. The other 8 parishes are the Southeast Louisiana Clean Fuel Partnership. They're primarily around the New Orleans area. We've got the other 58 parishes. The purpose of this coalition, again, it was established, Clean Cities was established back in 1993, so those of you that remember back into the 90s, you recognize that America had some severe concerns about our dependence on foreign oil, that we had clean air problems, particularly the Baton Rouge area, the New Orleans area, but Baton Rouge and surrounding parishes had some areas that were in non-attainment for air quality. And we were pretty much stuck on the old energy infrastructure and old energy industries. God bless Exxon, and God bless all of the oil and gas companies that have worked here for years and years and years. But the rest of the world started transitioning, and we needed to transition as well. And so the Clean Cities Coalition was designed all across America, and there are hundreds of these now that are designed to help in those 3 areas: reduce the dependence on foreign oil, help us clean the air, and develop and grow new technologies. And so I think that we passed out some materials, and if you get a chance, you can flip through those. Our Louisiana Coalition will later this month be sending out a more detailed, elaborate report, but I wanted to let you see the graphs and see some of that information. There is kind of a knee-jerk response, I think, when you talk about alternative fuels in Louisiana, and the knee-jerk is, what's this going to do to our oil and gas industry? This is going to be bad for us. Because I think, unfortunately, people consider the alternative fuel industry as maybe just electric. And it is way more than that, so much more than that. And in the charts that you will see, you'll see that the vast majority of the alternative fuel vehicles and the growth are in the petrochemical industry. And so I don't mean to be elementary, but just so that you'll better understand, let me explain to you how this works. In the days of Jed Clampett, he could be shooting for some food, and up from the ground came a bubbling crude, and that was black gold, Texas tea, as Jed Clampett would say. And we took that and we turned it into heating oil, and we turned it into gasoline, and we turned it into other products. Well, when we were growing our energy industry all across America, and in particular in Louisiana, we were digging that hole in the ground, and a whole bunch of stuff would come out, and if we didn't have a market for it, we just burned it off. And so you could drive through the rural parts of Louisiana, and you could see flares all across the countryside. We were flaring off natural gas. We were flaring off propane. We were flaring off butane and all the ethanes and all of those other gases. And we were keeping that black crude because it was worth about $100 a barrel. And Louisiana's economy and America's economy, to a large part, was kind of built around that from the energy infrastructure standpoint. Well, when gasoline, that $100 barrel oil, started going down, we started realizing we've got this product that we're burning off here. What can we do with that? Why don't we capture it and do something with it? And so we started capturing natural gas and propane and butane and pentane and all of these other things, and we would go bring them to a refinery and separate them and then use them in our refineries and produce some of the world's greatest products. As long as we had a marketplace for these materials, we could continue to dig that hole, and it didn't matter if oil was $50 a barrel or if it was $100 a barrel, we could make money on some of the other products. Well, that's kind of how this growth started. And then we got into fracking, and some really smart engineers figured out how we could dig down and then dig sideways, and we could get a whole bunch of this stuff out of the earth. And America went from importing and being reliant on foreign oil to about 30%, to now we're net exporters. Louisiana is the number 2 producer of natural gas. We're the number 2 producer of propane, and we are exporting, for the first time in America's history, we're exporting some of these very valuable, God-given products that our industries are taking advantage of, our economy is taking advantage of. We, because of that, have been able to grow an industry that nobody thought Louisiana would ever grow, and that's the alternative fuel industry. And let me give you a specific example. A gentleman called me and gave me permission to give these numbers. UPS, what a great, great partner and a great, great company UPS is. So UPS comes to Louisiana, and they've made a commitment all across the globe to say we're going to change our diesel engines, our gasoline engines, we're going to change them out, and we're going to use alternative fuel engines. And we're going to try to use all kinds of fuels. We're going to use electric, and we're going to use the biodiesels, and we're going to use hydrogen cells, and we're going to use propane, and we're going to use CNG and LNG, and we're going to use whatever is available with the ultimate goal of switching out. And Louisiana, to its credit, to its legislative credit, back in 2007, set up an incentive program that made it very attractive for people to come and start these industries and grow a new economy. UPS took that incentive and they built 3 CNG stations, one in New Orleans, one in Shreveport, one in Port Allen. They brought in 200 Class 6 and Class 8 CNG trucks and traded out the diesel vehicles for these new cleaner burning CNG vehicles. They displaced, in the first year of operation, 1.5 million gallons of diesel with clean burning CNG. They put 12 stations all across Louisiana for propane vehicles, mostly in rural areas. Closest one to this area is over in Gonzales. So when UPS Brown drives their van up, chances are now you're going to see one of the 300 propane-powered vehicles from UPS delivering your packages. 300 vehicles in Louisiana, 12 different locations. Across the country, UPS has 8,600 alternative fuel vehicles operating, with, again, their goal transferring all of their petroleum-based vehicles into alternative fuel-based vehicles. Now, with the growth of this industry and the help that we had in the legislature, you would think that the legislature would want to continue this. Unfortunately, because of and here's the propane hat, because of the financial situation that the state was in, this past year, the legislature went looking to cut tax exemptions and tax credits. And they looked at this growing industry, and unfortunately, they cut us off at the knees. They said, we're going to give you 5 more years, and that's it. We're going to cut your tax credit from 50% down to 30%. And there are some other rules and regs, some of which actually aren't too onerous. But the legislature, in the time that this industry is trying to grow, trying to develop new infrastructure and keep Louisiana as an energy-producing state and keep us as energy leaders, they've decided to cut our knees out from under us. Now again, that's my presentation from the propane standpoint, because as you'll notice in some of the materials, tremendous growth in alternative fuel vehicles, and they did it, as UPS said, they did it because Louisiana wanted to start growing these industries. I believe that people will look back on this in a couple of years and they'll say, maybe we need to extend this, maybe we need to go back with the credits. Other states are going to be way more competitive. Let's see what we can do about changing that. So that is my hope that we'll be able to do that. A couple of quick points and then open up for questions. I want to talk a little bit about autonomous vehicles. And it may sound like, and we got some old people here, older people, some seasoned people here that probably grew up with the comic series, The Jetsons. You may remember Meet George Jetson, his boy Elroy, daughter Judy, Jane his wife. It was a futuristic cartoon series where people got in vehicles and the vehicles took them where they wanted to go. They didn't really have to drive them. The vehicles were just programmed to go from one place to the next. You may have seen a Google vehicle riding the streets of your neighborhood. Nobody in there, but it's got the little cone and it's mapping the streets of America. When you get on the tram in the Atlanta airport, there's no driver on that. You get on that, it automatically takes you where you want to go, opens doors, drops you off. Autonomous vehicles have been around for a long, long time. Some of you may be driving a vehicle right now with some of that infrastructure in it. If you've got a rear view mirror, that's some of the autonomous vehicle infrastructure. If you've got a parking assist, you still don't know how to parallel park, and you've got a parking assist, you have the technology of autonomous vehicles. Well, as is typically the case, the capitalists out there, the scientists out there, the inventors and the innovators and the entrepreneurs are well ahead of government. And we've been devising these items, these wonderful components for many, many years, and government's just now realizing, wait a minute, government's got to step in. My encouragement here is Louisiana has started stepping in as well. There are states like Nevada, Michigan, California that already have state laws dealing with autonomous vehicles. Many of you are familiar with Julie Stokes, and prayers to Julie Stokes and the Stokes family. She's going through some cancer treatments right now. She's the lead author on autonomous vehicle legislation in Louisiana. Very forward thinking, trying to make sure that Louisiana is ready as this technology comes to our state. We're going to be ready to handle that. Some of those laws may be burdensome to the growth of the industry, and some of them hopefully will open the door for greater innovation and allow a state like Louisiana to take advantage of the alternative fuel market that we are growing and build that and have that work with the autonomous vehicle market. Last thing I want to mention has to do with a deadline that's coming up very shortly. Some of you are familiar with the Volkswagen vehicle settlement. I've got a sheet of paper from our Department of Environmental Quality in your information. The Volkswagen company made some mistakes, and they admitted they made some mistakes, and the federal government came in and fined them criminally and civilly in the neighborhood of $4.3 billion. And as part of that agreement, the Volkswagen company has said, we will provide to the states on a pro rata basis, depending on how many Volkswagens they sold and dealt with, will provide to the states funding if they can provide alternative fuel vehicles or alternative fuel plans that will take NOx, take that out of the vehicles that are running now and replace them with clean burning alternative fuels. Louisiana's been working on this, and frankly, Louisiana's moving pretty well with it. There was an initial deadline of the end of June. That deadline's been extended now to July 27th. That's Thursday. So if anybody wants to participate in the Volkswagen settlement program, they have until July 27th, that's Thursday, to get information into the Department of Environmental Quality. Doesn't have to be a very elaborate form, really very simple, where you say, here's my plan to exchange vehicles that are burning diesel and have them exchanged for alternative fuel vehicles. That $18 million is being broken up. $6 million of it's going to go to the Department of Transportation and Development. DOTD is going to take their own vehicles and they're going to switch diesel vehicles and change them into alternative fuel vehicles. The other 12 isn't earmarked for school buses, but there's a strong encouragement for school systems, individual owners of school buses, to look at this transformation. This is incredibly important for a community like Baton Rouge. City of Baton Rouge they've got about 700 school buses right now. They lost 168 of them in the flood. 68 of that 168 were immediately replaced. 10 of those were propane-powered vehicles. They've got an order in for 20 to 30 more propane-powered vehicles. They're going to couple that with a grant from EPA and hopefully the settlement money so that they can grow this. Let me tell you why this is important. When I grew up, and when many of you grow up, we used to tell the joke about I had to walk to school uphill both ways in the snow without shoes, and that's how terrible it was. Well, we knew it wasn't that terrible, but let me tell you what is terrible. You take a 6-year-old little girl and you put her on a bus and you stick her in Baton Rouge traffic where there's a bus in front of her and a bus behind her and it's belching diesel fumes. That's a real life story, and that's not good. And East Baton Rouge Parish School Board said, we got to do something about this, and they are doing something about this. I want to commend them for their efforts. They're applying for this grant through Department of Environmental Quality. Their efforts are exemplary, and I hope that they're very successful. Again, if we can get government out of the way. They have to take a diesel-powered vehicle, and they have to take it off the road, and they have to exchange it for an alternative fuel vehicle. By the rules of the settlement, technically they have to take a working vehicle off. So those 160 school buses that were ruined may not qualify. They're working on that. We've got encouragement. Might want to encourage the Congressman's office to look at that to see if there's any encouragement that they can make to see if the Baton Rouge school system can take best advantage of swapping out those damaged school buses for new alternative fuel buses. If you have anybody that would be interested anywhere across the state, DEQ has on their website the very simple form to fill out for this. And again, the encouragement would be if you can do anything with school systems and school buses, I think DEQ would be very interested in that. I appreciate your time, appreciate the interest that you've had in a topic that maybe isn't front page news, but I think is very important to our community, and be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Yeah, the question was about the timeline and how much time we think it will take to get some of these projects operating. I can tell you that City of Lafayette already has 8 propane-powered school buses. City of Baton Rouge right now has 10, and they're looking at 20 to 30 more propane-powered vehicles. Lafourche Parish has propane-powered vehicles. Caddo Parish has propane-powered vehicles. So some of these are already online. I think the real question mark is going to be for this Volkswagen settlement. We're going to have about $12 million. How are they going to be able to spread this $12 million out across the state, make it fair, and get the real best bang for the buck? And I talked to them this morning to ask that very question, and unfortunately they don't have a timeline. But knowing that the deadline is Thursday, they will start immediately. They're going to work with Department of Natural Resources, and those two groups, Department of Natural Resources and Department of Environmental Quality, will be putting together a plan for how they want to spend their $12 million. And we're, as a group, going to keep on top of them to make sure that that's moving as quickly as possible. The question was, how much does outfitting an alternative fuel bus cost? There are several ways that you can go about this. You can actually buy an OEM vehicle, buy it from Bluebird, buy it from Thomas, and that bus will come already prepared and built either with CNG or LNG or propane. And generally those costs are going to run you $8,000 to $10,000 to $14,000 additional. The hope is that we can take this settlement money, we can parlay that with some federal credits, some EPA credits, and make up the difference there. Because ultimately what you're looking at, and again it's going to depend on some prices, but let's say the price of gas is $2.50. Let's say the price of diesel is $3. We know it's a little bit less than that now, but it's kind of been averaging in that neighborhood. The natural gas prices and the propane prices are going to be in the lower dollar range. And so it's going to take, by estimates, about 3 years to recoup the difference in the cost of an alternative fuel vehicle and the traditional diesel-powered vehicles. What you get in exchange for that, however, is the cleaner burning vehicles don't get dirty as much. In fact, they don't get dirty hardly at all. So you don't have to change the oil. You don't have to change the filters as often. They tend to run longer. Right now, I don't know the exact time frame, but I want to say maybe 25 years for a diesel-powered bus. They're already saying alternative fuel vehicles are going to be 30 years. So there's going to be offsets in all of that. Yeah, just some basics on the difference between, the question was basics on the difference between natural gas and propane. And I will tell you, propane, many of you are familiar with that little, that 20-pound canister that you get from Lowe's and Home Depot, and for many of the stores now you can trade them out. And we use them for barbecues, we use them for crawfish boils. Well, homes in rural parts of the state that don't have a natural gas line, if you've seen that big white tank that's on the side of a house in rural parts, that's a propane tank. And the residents there use that just like they would use natural gas. They heat their homes, they cook their food, they can dry their clothes with it, they can do lights with it. Anything that you can do with natural gas, you can do with that big propane tank. Natural gas is delivered through a gas line, and it's gaseous in its natural state. And so for it to be put into a vehicular state, it has to be compressed, which is why they call it compressed natural gas. It's got to be put under tremendous pressure. So that costs a little bit more than the pressure for propane. Same thing with liquefied natural gas. To liquefy this liquid, methane, you've got to put it under tremendous pressure. To do that, you've got to have a thicker tank, a heavier tank, a little bit more expensive unit to compress that gas and then move it from one place to the other. Hope that answered your question a little bit. Natural gas is cheaper because it's much more abundant. It's the 800-pound gorilla of alternative fuels. We have an abundance of it in America, and especially in Louisiana. Propane is kind of the red-headed stepchild, and love propane. But if you don't have access to a natural gas line, it's a wonderful fuel, and then we're finding that it's got, because it doesn't take as much pressure to compress it and liquefy it, the tank doesn't have to be nearly as thick. It's much more available and portable for light-duty trucks and vehicles. Well, not just if you're driving about 20,000 miles, you have to drive about 20,000 miles a year, and honestly, I don't know what school buses are driving. But if you're driving on the average of 20,000 miles a year, and that's with gasoline prices being relatively high, $2.50 in that range, and with natural gas and propane prices being relatively low. And let me also say, when I talk to you about propane prices and natural gas prices, those are prices that once a school system buys this system, they then buy this gas from a third party. There's lots of markups on that. Eventually, we see that these school systems and others, like UPS, for instance, are going to say, we're going to do our own system. And we're going to get gas, instead of our fuel costs being in the $1.75, $1.50 range, we're going to get our fuel down for maybe $1 or less. So I recognize that I was being a little bit, and that's a real, don't laugh at me, that's a real number.
That's not a real number.
That's a very real number.
Not less than $1.
Well, if you...
I'm in the oil business.
You should check and see what oil at Bellevue is, what natural gas at Bellevue is costing. And I think you'll see the ups and downs, and certainly the availability of inexpensive natural gas and propane. The school system here in East Baton Rouge Parish, unlike many of the others, owns all of their buses. Some systems will have individuals own their buses, some have a partial breakdown, but in East Baton Rouge Parish, all approximately 700 buses are owned by the school system. Of those, we were told 166 to 168 were either lost completely or damaged. And so there may have been some of those that were damaged with some repairs were able to be put back into commission. 68 were immediately replaced. And that was, if you ask Bluebird and if you ask Thomas and Roush, how many school buses can you get me tomorrow? Very difficult to ask for 100 school buses, but they made the request, but they were able to get 68, 10 of those which are propane-powered school buses. Hope that answered your question, John. Right. As I talk about government having to catch up with the private sector sometime, the propane industry is not regulated like the natural gas industry is. Natural gas is regulated through the Public Service Commission, and there's a great deal of regulation at that point. Propane is more of a free market. It's regulated under Department of State Police, and it tends to be more free market. So frankly, you can go to one place and you can buy your little barbecue pit tank, and you can get it for $50, and you can go somewhere else and you can get it for $30. It's kind of a free enterprise type program, and that's where the communities are going to have to bid it. They're going to have to aggressively bid it. In Louisiana, we've got probably 25 or 30 different vendors of propane specifically, so I think that you can get a good bid price. Yeah, the question was a very good question, asking about the personal vehicles and plans to promote for personal vehicles. The first effort for the people that are putting in a great deal of money, certainly they want to get the best bang for their buck, and so the first effort appears to be with fleet vehicles, appears to be city parish vehicles, fleets that are private, like UPS, for instance, Republic, Waste Management, and these types of companies. And so while there are individual vehicles out there, we're all probably familiar with Tesla and their marketing campaign and the growth of the electric fuel stations that they have across the state. I don't see that as a near-term growth market. Now, there are groups like Clean Cities and our coalition that are heavily promoting these opportunities with the individuals. You're going to see people in the natural gas industry or people that work with Waste Management or Republic, and they're going to be driving CNG vehicles. You're going to see people in the propane industry and possibly people that work at the school system that will ultimately be driving propane vehicles. But right now, the difference, if you had an $8,000 conversion, $8,000 to $10,000 conversion, if you're not getting a tax credit for that conversion, and the price of your fuel, you as an individual wouldn't have the ability to negotiate a price just like the individuals or just like the people at the school system. They would be negotiating much better prices. All of that said, I don't want to talk down about it. I just think it's going to be a long time before the private individual market grows. Yeah, I think that the comment was dealing with the fact that propane, again, is that kind of redheaded stepchild of the alternative fuels out there. And you're absolutely right. It's got limited applications, and it will have limited opportunities for growth. But those opportunities right now are tremendous. They're tremendous in light-duty vehicles. They're tremendous in school buses. And the reason has more to do with the cost of the fueling infrastructure and the nature of the fuel itself. To compress natural gas takes a very expensive, sometimes $1 million piece of equipment to compress that gas to a liquid form, and then the tank that has to hold it has to be extremely thick, and the maintenance on these vehicles go through lots of machinations that you don't have to do with a diesel vehicle or that you have to do with a propane vehicle. Propane, on the other hand, compresses relatively easily, and it's stored in a relatively small tank, and its power is very comparable. The gasoline gallon equivalent is very comparable. The octane on it's 106. It burns a little bit hotter. So those of you in South Louisiana that have ever had a crawfish boil and you hook that crawfish burner up to your natural gas line and you said, how come it takes forever for this water to boil? It's just the nature of that product that propane burns hotter and a little bit quicker. And so if you're going to heat your home and you got natural gas, that's the way you want to go. If you want to do a crawfish boil, you're going to want to do propane. Baton Rouge is one. Shreveport has done an excellent job with its natural gas, CNG and LNG. And I think a lot of people think that it has to do with the Haynesville Shale play up there, and it may have some to do with that, but they've got people up there that are very aggressively promoting the natural gas alternative fuels, and we certainly give them a great deal of credit. Baton Rouge has got some mixture. We've got fleet facilities like Waste Management and Republic up and down the river that are doing the CNGs and the LNGs. I mentioned UPS and the propane around here. We've got quite a few electric fueling stations, and there seems to be growth of that. You see it on the LSU campus. There's electric fueling downtown. Whole Foods has electric fueling as well. I would say those two areas of the state are leading. Well, the question had to do with law enforcement vehicles in particular and state vehicles, and I'll make 2 points. Number one, propane and natural gas, CNG and LNG, require a larger tank than the plastic gas tanks that we have now for Exxon unleaded, for instance, or for a diesel vehicle. And the law enforcement officers tell us that to put that large tank, you'd have to put it in the trunk, and they have lots of equipment, armed equipment, not from a danger standpoint, but they have lots of equipment that they put in their trunk and that they don't want to take up that space. So that would be one of the issues that I think you would have with that. The other thing is, you mentioned the idling, and that's incredibly important. And if you look on the paper, one of the things that this organization has tried to do is to try to do more training. There are literally millions of gallons of gasoline that can be saved if everybody took better advantage of some idling tips. The first thing that I would tell you is there are people that think that it takes more gas to start an engine than it does to keep it idling, and that's just not true. And so when you're in line at the bank, when you're in line at school picking up your kids, you're in line at an LSU football game, or unfortunately you're in line on Interstate 10 on a Friday afternoon, you may want to just shut that engine off. And if you're going probably 10 to 20 seconds, you are saving gasoline, you are saving emissions, and I'm glad you mentioned the idling, because it's part of our efforts to try to do a better job of communicating with people that that's something that you can do right now, save gasoline gallons and clean our air. Thank you.